good and perfect gift comes down from you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. And everything we ever needed we found in you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. You're the God who's more than enough. Like you give away your love. Like you give us everything. Oh, everything, everything we need. Every good and perfect gift comes down from you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. Everything we ever needed we found in you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. You're the God who does not change. No, your goodness stays the same. Oh, and now your mercy's all we know. It follows us everywhere, everywhere we go. Oh, and when evil tempts us, we will never say that we were tempted by you. Oh, and when things seem hopeless, we will never say there is nothing you can do. 'Cause your word is true. And every good and perfect gift comes down from you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. Everything we ever needed we found in you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. Hey, once again, good evening, Terra Nova. So glad that we are here together on a beautiful Saturday night. And bonus, we are going to learn a brand new song tonight that Christina is going to teach us. We're going to try the chorus together. Great words, great reminder that God is good all the time and everything good comes from Him. So she's going to teach us this chorus. You ready? You ready, Christina?
I'm ready.
Okay, all right. Well, okay.
He never has, He never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never will. My God will never fail.
Can we try that together?
He never has, He never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never will. My God will never fail. moment he says the word, and suddenly it's overcome. The moment he says that it's done, I know that I know it is done. He never has, he never will. My God will never fail. He never has, he never, never will. My God will never fail. God's never stopped in what's impossible. Faith loves impossible things. The story of God and His promise is final. If He says it is, then it is. Yes, even what's dead has to live. He never has, He never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never, never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never, never will. My God will never fail. He tears down walls, He opens up seas, makes giants fall. That's the God who's with me. Death will heal, the blind will see, the night will pass. That's the God who's with me. Whoa, that's the God who's with me. Whoa, that's the God who's with me. He never has, He never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never, never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never, never will. My God will never fail. Whoa, that's the God who's with me. Whoa, that's the God who's with me.
Never has, He never will.
My God will never fail.
He never has, He never, never will. My God
will never fail.
He never has,
He never will. My God will never fail. He never has, He never, never will. My God will never fail.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You've been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You've been so, so kind to me. Oh, the deserve it. Still you gave your life away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Your foe, still your love fought for me. You've been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, still you paid it all for me. You've been so, so kind to me. Still you gave your life away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. Oh, I couldn't earn it, I did not deserve it. Still you gave your life away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, a lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Hey God, we are grateful that your love is so relentless in your pursuit of us, God. There are so many times when we have given up on ourselves. We've given up on people around us, God. But you never give up. You never give up on us, God. Your love is relentless. Your mercy and your grace are boundless. God, we want to be like that. We want to be people whose love is also relentless, whose mercy for those around us, whose grace for everyone we meet, God. It knows no bounds. It knows no ends. But we are great reflection of who you are. We live our lives that way, God, and we're seen by the world that way as people who reflect the love of God, like a great mirror back to the world around us, God. Just reflecting your light and your love everywhere we go. We pray that you would help us to do that. We pray that you would empower us and invigorate us, God, to do that. Well, thanks again for being here tonight. We've got a great night ahead of us still. And last week we kicked off this great new project we're doing over the next month or so called Operation Christmas Child. So I got a question for you. When do you normally start, because that's part of this project, when do you normally start Christmas shopping? Is it somewhere around November 1st or maybe December 21st? Meet somebody and ask the person next to you, hey, when do you usually start shopping? Go for it.
Well, welcome to Terra Nova. Thank you for just, battling that heat out there and joining us on this beautiful fall day. If you can take a seat, that'd be great. My name's Ashley. I'm so glad you're here tonight. We're just glad to be together on this beautiful October day. If you're a guest, thank you so much for being here tonight. I hope you enjoy the movie quality popcorn, as I say. You can smell it from a mile away when you pull up. But if you're a guest, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and just be here. And we just hope you enjoy this experience so much. When we came in tonight, we got our weekend program. So if you want to pull that out or use the Terra Nova app, a lot of people use that as well. You'll see we have so many fun things coming up. It is the holiday season. As you heard that Christmas music, it was a little shocking to hear that. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, well, I don't know about that, but you know what? We got to get in the spirit, right? You'll see we have our trunk or treat coming up next weekend. So excited about that. Terra Nova Tour is coming up as well. I am just looking forward to all of that. But if you go to the back, you'll see we have our Connect card here. And this is actually my favorite part of our program because this is a place where I say it gets personal, but in a good way. Because you get to share things like prayer requests or even just good things in your life that are happening or something that our prayer team has been praying over you for. If you're a guest, we would love for you to fill this out and feel free to check any boxes of anything that you would like more information on, and we will make sure to get back to you. And you can take time during the gathering to fill this out and drop it in the offering on the way out, or fill it out on the app, whatever you'd like to do. Maybe write down what you're dressing up as for Halloween. I don't know. I like finding out things about you guys. So fill that out, or like, what's your favorite candy? I don't know. I'm excited for trunk or treat, so that's where my head's at. But make sure you drop us an offering. We'd love to get this back. If you're a guest, if you're 100th time here, we love hearing from everyone. So be filling this out, and we'd love to get that back from you. But speaking of the holiday season, I know it's Halloween coming up, but our minds are thinking forward here at Terra Nova, and we are thinking of Christmas already. Obviously, we have our Operation Christmas Child. If you didn't see the big table out there, you can't miss it. But this is a program that we're doing because we acknowledge that we have been given so much, and that we want to truly extend that generosity out into the world. And again, I know it seems a little early to talk about this, but it got me thinking too. I was like, wow, Christmas, okay, my relatives are asking like what my 3-year-old daughter wants for Christmas. So I asked her and I was like, hey, like if you were to get a gift, what would you want? I mean, is it gonna be an iPhone, guacamole? I don't know, like, kids are growing up fast. So I asked her and she said that she wants a doctor bag and doctor tools. And I was like, oh, that's great. Like, it's me, the first practicing doctor in our family, and she can pull her weight financially. So I'm so excited for her to get that gift and become a practicing doctor. That's exciting for her. But it also made me realize that there are so many kids in this world that that's not even something they get asked. It's not, a lot of kids don't get the, hey, like, what do you want? Write down 10 things. That is not a reality for many people in this world. And we are just so abundantly blessed that we even get to ask that of each other. And this is something that's near and dear to our hearts because we want to fill that void for some families who don't get to ask that question. And so we would just love for anyone who can participate in this holiday season to grab a box out there. Comes with everything you would need to know in this pamphlet. Grab the pamphlet as well, and we would love for you to fill this box with gifts. It has to be able to close. I saw a couple of overflowing ones out there. We do want to be able to close, but then it comes with this cool thing too that you can fill out and put in the box so that whoever receives your gift would get to know more about you as well. And what I love about this is that it's very kid-friendly. If you have kids, if you have grandkids, they can participate in this. Something that we're going to do is put a doctor kit in here so that our daughter can see that some other kid also gets to be a doctor in their family and know that on Christmas Day someone will be opening the same gift as her. And so that's kind of something fun we're doing if you want an idea for that. I'm hoping it's going to fit in here. I don't know what doctors use. But I'm so excited for her to just see what that feels like, to say, oh, like I'm getting this, but someone else is getting this too who maybe wouldn't get this. So please get your kids involved, take them to the store with you. I know that's terrifying as a parent sometimes, like, wait, I have to take them down to toy aisle? Oh boy. But just set up that conversation of, yeah, but this is for other people. This is for other kids. And even take the time to pray over the box once you fill it with your kids. That's another simple way to involve them in just being generous. And so make sure you grab one of these or just stop by the table if you have any more questions. And we want to get these back early because they do have to go around the world. So it has to be back by November 12th. So be filling it up if you can and bring it back so that we can make sure it gets to the right people. Again, we're so excited just to be doing so many fun things this holiday season and the gift that we get to do that. We hope you come back for trunk or treat. I want to see, this is Saturday night, right? So I want to see the cars, the trunks, the costumes. I know Saturday night goes crazy. So be ready for it to be, I mean, are you guys going to all dress up next weekend? Am I going to look out in the crowd and it's going to be like crazy? I want to see it, okay? I'm a costume. There goes my Connect card. But again, we're so pumped you're here. If you're a guest, thank you for being here. We actually kicked off this series a few weeks ago that everyone's really been enjoying, myself as well, and it is called Good News is for Sharing.
During the 1st century, when the Romans ruled the known world, a grassroots countercultural movement was born in the eastern end of the empire.
Yeah, it started among the Jewish people,
who for centuries now have been scattered around the known world.
But no matter where they lived or what language they spoke, they kept their identity as the family of Abraham, devoted to the one true God.
And every year, they would travel to Jerusalem for sacred festivals. And during one of these, the Feast of Pentecost, the visitors encountered a group of Jews who could somehow speak in everyone's native dialect.
Yeah, they were telling stories about a man named Jesus who had been executed by the Romans. They claimed he had risen from the dead and was now exalted as the true king of Israel and the whole world. And this Jesus was now calling people to adopt his upside-down set of values and live under his rule, called the Kingdom of God.
And thousands of Jews decided to stay in Jerusalem and join the movement. It grew in size and in influence and gained favor with people.
But not with the Jerusalem temple leaders. They viewed this whole thing as a dangerous religious sect, and they even executed one of its leaders named Stephen.
It's no longer safe in Jerusalem, and so most of the followers flee for the outlying land called Judea.
And you might think that's the end of the story, but actually, this tragedy became the way the movement spread outside Jerusalem.
The scattered followers end up in surprising places, like Samaria, where their ancient enemies live.
Yeah, and Luke shows us how all of these unexpected people start following Jesus, like a sorcerer from Samaria who has to learn that the way of Jesus isn't about gaining power, but giving it up to serve others.
There's also a story about an Ethiopian delegate who, after discussing the scroll of the prophet Isaiah with Philip, decides to join the movement.
Yeah, Jesus is expanding his movement out into Judea and Samaria just like he said he would.
Which is great.
But back in Jerusalem, we meet Saul of Tarsus. He's part of the religious elite who oppose the new movement, and he's finding and arresting Jesus' followers anywhere he can.
This is a cruel guy.
But think about it from his perspective. In the past, Israel had turned away to other gods and to false prophets, leading to disaster. He believed he was protecting Israel and God's honor by getting rid of these people.
And then Saul hears that the movement spread north to Damascus, so he sets out there to find and arrest more followers.
And on the way, Saul has this sudden encounter with the risen Jesus himself. Jesus asks Saul why he's fighting against him. And then Jesus commissioned Saul to now represent him to Israel and to the nations.
And Saul is stunned and speechless.
And so he ends up in Damascus. But now he's announcing the good news about the Jesus he had just been attacking.
And no one saw this coming.
Totally.
Welcome to Terra Nova on a beautiful summer evening. Summer in October, winter in July, apparently, but summer in October, love it. And as Ashley said, we are part 4 of the series, Good News is for Sharing. It's based on this idea that it's just human nature to want to share good things that we're experiencing with other people. And just as a side note, we've got a great excuse to put this into practice next week. There is some intentionality to this because next weekend, as Ashley was saying, next Saturday night is Trunk or Treat, which is so good. It's so fun. And this is a great opportunity for you to invite some people and say, hey, this is going to be really fun. It's one of the coolest things we do all year long. And when you're heading out, you'll see there's a table out there that has Trunk or Treat on it. You can sign up to sign your trunk up because I think we still need a few more who will help provide the experience. I'm going to be a part of that, invite you to be a part of that too. And there's some invite cards, you can grab those. But check this out. We've also put together about 100 or more of these things that are called boo bags. And the way this works is there's a little note where you get to say, for us, our family, we'll just write from the Reeds, and you can write your own family and who it's from. And there's an invite card. And then there's a bunch of candy in there, and you can drop some more candy in there if you want to. You just set these in at some of your neighbors' houses. I don't know, some of you have booed your neighbor before. So that's what this is all about. Grab a few of these and just share some love. And here's why. Because it's good. It's just good this is going to be a fun thing, and you won't regret having somebody that you brought with you, somebody with some kids or little kids or so forth. And the reason why is because when you experience something good or you find out about something that's great, you want to pass that on. You want to, hey, have you seen this yet? Or, man, you haven't watched that? You haven't heard that before? Oh, you're going to love it. And so that is exactly, as it turns out, how the Jesus movement began, with people experiencing something that was so good, so jaw-droppingly wonderful and amazing and life-changing. It was such good news that they couldn't help but pass it on. In fact, they literally called it the good news. And so we in the series are going back to some of their stories, back to our roots, if you will, found in a document known as the Acts of the Apostles, or Acts for short, which is a history of the early Jesus movement, written by a doctor and a historian named Luke, to see if there are ideas that we can glean from our roots that will help us propel the good news of the Jesus movement into the next generation. So, previously on Good News is for Sharing, the movement began, as we said, in Jerusalem, which was the very city where only weeks earlier, not years earlier, but just weeks earlier, Jesus had been crucified. His followers did not see that coming. And then days later was alive again. They really did not see that coming. And he met his followers, as we saw in week 1. They're stunned. They're still struggling to believe this is even possible. And he told them to take this movement and this good news to all the nations, beginning in Jerusalem and then to Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And they began to do that in Jerusalem, right under the noses of the people who had killed Jesus, to witness to that boldly. And as you can imagine, that message was not very popular with the very powerful people who had killed Jesus, thinking they had put a stop to this movement. And eventually they've had enough, the authorities have had enough, and they catch a young leader named Stephen, and some false accusations are made, and there's a bit of a trial, and then they drag Stephen out of the city and they stone him, which was actually a really common form in the ancient world, a common form of mob violence. And it's here in this dark moment that Luke introduces us to a new character in the story. Meanwhile, he says, the witnesses to this killing laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Shaul, or Saul. And little does Saul, or Shaul, know he is about to become one of the most famous, one of the most influential, one of the most studied and written about individuals in all of human history. Saul at this time is in his late 20s. He was born in Tarsus, which was a renowned philosophical center in the ancient world, a part of the Greek-speaking world. His father was actually a Roman citizen. They were fairly well-to-do financially, and his family and his father were very, very devout. A devout Jewish man from the tribe of Levi, and he's a Pharisee, which is the strictest of all of the branches of Judaism at the time. And Paul was raised with that, and he was raised with that devotion and that passion and the stories of Torah, and he loved them. Better than that, he excelled at them. He was the best and the brightest in Torah school. And so as a teenager, probably at 13, he was moved by his family to the city of Jerusalem, where he became a disciple or a student of the most renowned rabbi of the day named Gamaliel. It's kind of like getting into Harvard or getting into Yale. This is the cream of the crop, and he becomes a student of Gamaliel. And it is there in Jerusalem, most likely in his late 20s, that he began to see, or mid-20s, I should say, that he began to see this rabbi from Nazareth that everyone was talking about named Joshua or Jesus coming to Jerusalem during the festivals, and he would hear this man talk about Torah, and it was weird because he seemed at once to observe and to flaunt the laws and the traditions. I mean, the people that he hung out with, the unclean people he seemed to hang with, and his followers. They're these Galileans. They're stupid, uneducated fishermen and tax collectors and women. There are women who follow this rabbi. I mean, the shock of it. And they begin to talk about him like he's the Messiah. How ridiculous, but worse. That's dangerous. And Saul was quite possibly in the room when his own rabbi, Gamaliel, cast his vote to crucify this dangerous rabbi. He was there to see him drag his cross through the city, nailed to it by those Romans, proving, of course, to everyone, especially to Shaul, that this man is cursed. I mean, God has clearly disowned this fraud. And then his ignorant followers start to talk about him being risen from the dead, and he's somehow now Lord of all and Messiah. It was all so offensive and so wicked smart and outraged and zealous. He is primed to purge God's people of this plague. And so when Stephen is arrested and dragged out of the city and stoned to death, he is a part of it all. And afterwards, Saul just gets unleashed. And the authorities see in him a leader. And he certainly is. He's brilliant, he's articulate, and he is a zealous leader who's willing to get his hands dirty. And so we're told by Luke that godly men buried Stephen, and they mourned deeply for him, but Saul began to destroy the church, or the word they used was ecclesia, the gathering, the assembly, going from house to house where these gatherings would meet. He's dragging them off, both men and women. There's a little bit like to that, and he's putting them in prison. And Saul becomes the number one inquisitor and henchman and Christian hunter. He has made it his life's mission, believing he's serving God. He's doing the right thing. He's purifying God's people of this dangerous scourge. Now, having introduced us to this fanatic Shaul, Luke, who is just such a great writer, he's such a great storyteller, he begins to intertwine stories of Philip, who we met last week going to Samaria, and then meeting this Ethiopian dignitary, the story we told last week, and Peter going to a Roman centurion, a man who represents Roman occupation and everything that Peter and Shaul's people have come to hate and see as unclean. And these people become unlikely participants in this movement. They're becoming part of it too. And then Luke tells us about the most unlikely person of them all. Acts chapter 9. Meanwhile, Shaul, or Saul, is still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. They weren't called Christians. They were followers or disciples of Jesus. And he went to the high priest in Jerusalem, and he asked for letters of recommendation to the synagogues, or the places where Jewish people would gather in the city of Damascus, 150 miles to the north. And the movement has begun to spread, this contagious movement, as Jesus' followers are fleeing from Jerusalem to all of these other regions. And he's like, give me some written authority and I'll go, so that if anyone is found there who belonged to the way, which is what the movement was called. It wasn't called Christianity. It was called the way, as in following God in the way of Jesus. And he says, if I find anybody who belongs to this thing they call the way, whether men or women, I will bring them back as prisoners here to Jerusalem. But it's on this journey to Damascus that Saul has an experience with Jesus himself, and it completely transforms his life. I mean, you can just imagine, it wrecks him. Talk about deconstructing your faith. It completely deconstructs everything he had ever believed his entire life and then reconstructs it all over again. And Saul goes from anti-Christian, Christian hater, Christian hunter to hair on fire, Jesus freak. And he immediately begins telling everyone who will listen about what he has experienced and about who this Jesus is. Well, he will spend about the next 10 years or so in obscurity. We know a little bit about what happens during this time. He eventually returns back to Tarsus, where he is from, working alongside his own family members, his own household, making tents, which is a family occupation. Even wealthy people, very Torah-learned people would have an occupation. It was part of just their values as a society, discussing philosophy and discussing Torah and reasoning with his own family members and the people of his own town. And this whole time, he's like rereading all of the scrolls. Rereading and going back through the story over and over and over again, seeing everything in entirely new light, seeing everything through this new lens of the Messiah being crucified and risen from the dead. And it's like all these lights are turning on. How did I not see that? It is so clear to him now. The Messiah had to suffer. He had to suffer under the weight of our sin, Isaiah 52 and 53, to be raised again, to break the power of death and darkness, and to defeat our real enemy, which Paul now comes to see was never Rome. The real enemy is something much more dark and much more insidious. Now, Luke, as he's writing the story of the Jesus movement, as we kind of sit with Saul on the back burner, he's begun to trace a different storyline. The movement is expanding, and it's expanding to Luke's own city, one of the largest, most cosmopolitan, most diverse cities in the ancient world, the city of Antioch. And it's here where Luke is a doctor. He's a doctor in this city, and this city becomes the site of the very first citywide great urban Jesus movement, where thousands and thousands of people from every possible walk of life and ethnicity and social class and religious background are coming together. Hundreds and hundreds of Jewish background people are becoming Jesus followers and now embracing this path, this way of Jesus. And then there are hundreds and thousands of people who have never eaten a kosher meal in their life, who have never read a word of Torah, who grew up worshiping all of the gods and all of the idols and sacrificing to the emperor's gods and their city gods and their family gods. And they're now embracing Jesus and this one true living God and his kingdom. And in Antioch, all of these people begin to live in community with one another. Historians say this is the first time in all of history that anything like this has ever happened. And this is the beginning of what will become, to this very day, by the way, the most diverse movement in all of history. Well, the OGs, the original followers who are still down here in Jerusalem, they hear about what's going on in Antioch because, again, it's the third largest city in the world. It's like there are travelers going back and forth all the time. And so they send one of their most respected leaders, a man named Barnabas, to find out what's going on. And Barnabas, when he arrives, he sees what the grace of God has done. And he's excited, he's glad, he begins to encourage them, but he also realizes how massive this movement has begun. And so he went and got some help. It's like, these people need a lot more than I can give them. And so Barnabas goes up to Tarsus from Antioch to go looking for Shaul, who he knows is still there, and he finds him and he brings him back to Antioch. And for a whole year, the two of them and other leaders are teaching and and growing the roots deep and developing these folks who are following Jesus. And that experience, I personally believe, that experience in that city at that time, multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-class, this egalitarian community, as they would be described, this ecclesia, which we translate as the word church, but it was gathering, this assembly that demonstrated the way of Jesus, the love and the compassion and the humility, the honesty, the truth, the equality, the mutuality, the way they shared everything and respected and included everyone, no matter who they were or where they came from. I believe it is that experience in Antioch that completely changed Saul's worldview, his realization of what God was actually doing in this world, and that experience became a passion for him, that God was forming a new humanity out of people who were very, very different from each other. Well, a year later, this Antioch community gets a sense that they believe is the Holy Spirit himself speaking to them, that Barnabas and Saul are to be sent out by the community to carry this movement to the nations. And so in 47 AD, Barnabas and Saul leave their Antioch community on their very first, what would be called a missionary journey, which is not a term they use because they were on mission every day, everywhere they were. There was no missionary journey, but they go on this first journey to what would be modern day central Turkey, at that time, the Roman province of Galatia. And they begin to go city to city. And everywhere they would go first to these synagogues where Jewish and Greek-speaking people have gathered who are familiar with Torah and are studying Torah and the Hebrew scriptures. And they would reason with them from the Hebrew scriptures. And they would try to connect all the dots and string the thread of the storyline, trying to help other people see what had become so incredibly obvious and clear to him now. And then they would move from these gatherings where there was Jewish or Greek background people who knew the Hebrew scriptures, and they would move from there out into the marketplace, out in kind of the open air, if you will, which was actually very commonplace. That was a culturally commonplace thing to do. There was nothing weird about them standing out in the marketplace and reasoning and talking. In fact, philosophers did this all the time. Dio Christensen said, if you're a philosopher and you don't take your message out to the common people in the marketplace, you're doing it all wrong. And so this was a simple way that they would communicate often. And so Saul is like, yeah, I'll do that. And he's out there reasoning with anyone who would talk with him. And it's here at this point in the story that Saul, or Shaul, or Saulus, as he would be known in Greek, began to go by his Roman name, a name that is hardly ever given to anyone who's not a Roman citizen, the name that he would be known for, Paulus. And he becomes known as Paul. But at every single stop along the way, and it's so clear as you read Luke's story, they experience life-threatening conflict and opposition and violence and danger just like Jesus. And they see themselves as being really just like him, that this good news, this truth, there's a power to it that just gives new life to so many people. And there are people all around who are getting it. And they're buying in, they're embracing the whole thing, and it's transforming them profoundly, their own lives, their families, their relationships, their communities in beautiful ways. And at the same time, the very same message is incredibly threatening to a lot of other people. Why? Well, because this good news was also new news, which met with resistance from those who were the keepers of the keepers of old religion, the keepers of old power and society and politics and culture. And so first in Pisidian Antioch, not to be confused with where they're coming from where this movement, they stay for a few weeks, and there's this Jesus following community that's formed, and there's a lot of energy behind it, but then opposition is stirred up, and they're actually, literally in Luke's words, they are run out of town, and they go down the road to Iconium, which is about 80 miles away, where a mob of leaders, we're told, decide to attack them and stone them, but they find out about it first, and they flee another 20 miles down the road to Lystra, where we pick up our story today. So, in Lystra, as they're out in the marketplace and they're reasoning with people, there sat a man who is lame. And then Luke's really particular because this man is known to the entire community. And so Luke knows his backstory. It has been explained to him. He has been that way from birth, and he has never walked, but he's listening to Paul. He's listening while Paul is speaking, and Paul looks directly at him, and he sees that the man has faith to be healed. There's something about the way the man is listening, and he's leaning in, and his eyes are lightening up. The way he seems to be just getting it. And Paul, looking at the guy, calls out in the crowd, "Stand up on your feet." And the man did. In fact, he leaped up, Luke says, and he began to walk. And the way that Luke is telling the story, and many other stories like this, he is clearly riffing on this famous scene from Isaiah 35, where God's new age is dawning and all wrong things are being made right. And part of what's a part of that new age is that the blind are seeing, and the deaf are hearing, and the lame are leaping like a deer. And Luke's like, God's new age is breaking in upon this world. But that is not what the crowd picks up from what happened. So as their jaws collectively hit the ground, they begin to shout in their own Lycaonian language or dialect, "The gods have come down to us in human form. The gods are here. Zeus and Hermes have come." And Barnabas, they began to call Zeus, and Paul, they called Hermes because he was the chief speaker. And if I'm Paul, I'm a little put off by this because Zeus was known to be rugged and handsome and big and attractive, and Hermes sounds a little like a disease. I'd be like, "Really, Barnabas, Zeus, you think? But Hermes, it turns out, and some of you know this from your studies in school, was the herald or the messenger of the gods, and particularly the herald or messenger or spokesperson for Zeus. He was the chief speaker. So they're like, okay, that guy must be Zeus, and this guy, the speaker, he must be Hermes, which might seem like kind of a crazy conclusion, like an extreme reaction for people to come to, but there was actually an ancient legend at the time described by the Roman poet Ovid just 30 or 40 years earlier, though the ancient legend went much further back, that Zeus and Hermes themselves had visited this region in the distant past disguised as mortals. And they went door to door knocking on homes, 1,000 homes, and they were turned away until finally this poor elderly couple named Bacchus and Philemon took them in to their tiny little hut made of straw, and they fed them with the last little bit of food they had, and Zeus and Hermes turned their straw hut into a beautiful palace, and then they destroy every other home in the valley. Well, these people are not going to make that mistake. They are not making the same mistake their ancestors made. So word just spreads like fire through the city. Zeus and Hermes have come. Zeus and Hermes have come. They're here, and you should see what we saw. Come out. In fact, the very priest of Zeus himself, whose temple is just outside the city, brings bulls and wreaths to the city gate. And as this is happening, people are speaking in the local dialect. So Barnabas and Paul, they don't know what's going on until they find themselves actually caught up in an ancient pagan sacrificial procession. There's dancing and there's music and people are decorated with wreaths, and there are 2 bulls, and bulls are expensive. But hey, they're not making a mistake. They are bringing out the best, and this parade has begun to march its way through the city, which clearly they're aware of until they realize it's for them. These sacrifices are being made to them as the parade nears the gates towards the temple of Zeus. And when Barnabas and Paul figure out what's happening, oh man, they are like men in a pit of snakes. They're like, we are in the wrong, we got to get out of here. And when they figure it, because somebody finally explains to them in Greek, right? They tore their clothes, which was a very common Greek and Jewish way of responding to something that was blasphemy, that God or the gods were being dishonored or shamed or in some kind of way. And it's like, no, we can't allow this to happen. So they're tearing their clothes and they rush into the crowd shouting, "Friends," and they got over all of the hubbub and people are dancing and singing, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? We are only human, just like you. We are just like you are." In fact, the word that Luke uses as he tells the story in Greek is homeopathos. We have the same passions, the same frailties, the same life as you have. We're just like you. We're only human. And then Luke gives us a snippet of how Barnabas and Paul talked to a group of people who do not have the same background, who do not share the same assumptions as they do in terms of the scriptures or beliefs or the storyline or even right or wrong and the hope of the Messiah, the deliverer who will come. They don't know anything about Yahweh. They don't know anything about this God who has revealed himself through Abraham and Moses and the prophets. They know nothing of that. They come from a worldview that has lots and lots of gods for everything imaginable, from the trees to the stars to the ground itself. There's the Greco-Roman pantheon, and then there are their local deities in their particular region. The Earth Mother was especially venerated, and then there are family gods. There are hundreds of gods and spirits and powers that always must be reckoned with, and to give proper honor. To give the proper honor to each one, to appease them and to appeal to them in just the right way, permeated every aspect of ancient life all over the world. And of course, there was always a danger you might be forgetting one. Or you might not have done it quite the right way to quite the right one, and there might be one you actually don't know of. And so as Barnabas and Paul run into this sacrificial procession that's in their honor, tearing their clothes, saying, no, please not this. Like, this is such the opposite of everything we're here for. We're only humans like you. And this is what they say. And we are bringing you, and here's our word, good news. Man, we are bringing you some good news, telling you to turn from worthless things or from empty or futile things. Like these things you do, these gods, these powers, these spirits you fear, the things you do to appease them or to appeal them, they're empty. They're empty. They're useless. They're lifeless. In fact, he doesn't even use the word gods to refer to them at all. But he says, there is a living God. There is a living God who, unlike all of the gods who are the images or the epitomes of all the things that are created, he's the one that actually created them. He created all of the things that you worship as gods, from the heavens to the earth to the sea to everything in them. And there's a sense of urgency to this message that he's sharing, because they say in the past, he let all nations go their own way. In other words, he's overlooked. He's overlooked the fact that people have not given him the honor he deserves, which would be a horrifying thing in the ancient world, that there is a God, particularly a very great God, who has actually been ignored. It is why they are doing this procession for two gods that they think are with. Like, you cannot dishonor or ignore a God. So this is horrifying to the ancients, but he's saying he's actually overlooked that. He's been waiting for a time. A particular time, as Paul will write in a letter back to these very communities, a letter we call the letter to the Galatians. He'll write this letter just a year or two later, and he'll talk about when the set time has come, when the right time came. So up till now, he's been overlooking, but at the same time, he says, yet he has not left you without witness. He's not left you without evidence of who he is and how he feels about you. He's been revealing himself to you through kindness, or literally doing good for you. He's been doing good. That is his fundamental posture towards you. His fundamental posture is kindness, his generosity, his goodness. And then they start to unpack this in terms that would frankly be meaningful to a rural agrarian farming community. And so he says, here's what that goodness has looked like. He's shown you his kindness by giving you rain from heaven, crops and seasons. He's given you plenty of food, and he fills your hearts with joy. In other words, the source of all of the good things that you enjoy in your life, the source of those things is not Zeus. And it's not the Earth Mother. It is the one true and living God who is actually good. He is good, and he loves you, and he wants you to turn to him so you will know him. And you do not have to live in fear of this God who trying constantly to appease them or any other force or spirit, and this empty path that takes you nowhere. And this really was a message that was good news. It really was good news. And there's a very real sense for all of us that the things we start to worship, when they are not real, or when they are not the truest or most ultimate thing that deserves that kind of attachment from us, all of those things eventually enslave us. They eventually enslave us, and this, in fact, is the language of the letter he'll write back to them in about a year and a half, this letter to the Galatians, that these things tend to trap us in this downward spiral of dehumanization, and God's Messiah has truly come to set you free and to give you life. So turn from these empty things and embrace the living God. And that is good news. But I want you to consider for a moment this speech that he gives. Because here's Barnabas and Paul doing their best under some really heated circumstances to share this good news, but notice what's missing from their description. There are no words like sin or hell or the Bible. In fact, there are no Bible verses quoted at all. No mention of the prophets or Moses. There's no talk about forgiveness. There's nothing about going to church or being born again or believing in your heart and being saved. None of that language is actually present. Now, granted, I need to say this. Luke's retelling of this is very abbreviated. They certainly had more to say than that. They had talked for more than that. And we'll get a little bit more in a similar scene when Paul gives a defense for his life in Athens, a scene that we get to look at in a couple of weeks, and that's going to be great. And certainly for all of those who are leaning into his story, they'll go further than this. They'll talk more. They'll explain more. But here's the thing. When Peter or Paul or Stephen or Barnabas or any of them speak to a Jewish background audience or even Greek background people who are familiar with the Hebrew scriptures, man, they use the language of Moses and the Psalms and the prophets, and they quote and frankly often are just riffing on Isaiah and David, and they're using these lines even without direct quotations, knowing that people are just picking up everything they're putting down, and they will trace the thread from Abraham to Moses to David to the prophets, and they'll speak of the Messiah and the necessity of his sacrificial death, which was, as it turns out, substitutional for us, and the resurrection and his exaltation to the right hand of God, Psalm 110, and the shared hope we all have in the resurrection and God's new age coming where everything wrong will be made right. And they will use that language, and they will use all of it and more, and they will use it prolifically, and they will use it profoundly. But here in Lystra, where none of that is common ground, where none of that language or common ground exists, they speak of the one true living God who is good, who cares about you, and of the emptiness of the path that they're on. And they wouldn't, by the way, be the first to talk about that kind of emptiness. Philosophers frequently pointed out the emptiness of superstitions that the common folk, in their words, had. And they speak of God's goodness. Of what theologians refer to often as common grace that God gives good gifts of the crops and the seasons and joy in your heart and good moments where you can't wipe the smile off your face and wisdom and beauty and talent and skill. And he gives these gifts, he gives them like rain. He scatters them generously in totally unmerited ways without anyone deserving or not deserving them, scatters them across the human race like seeds in order to enrich and brighten and preserve the world around us. And they're saying, that's who we are spokespersons for. That's who we represent. And we are calling you to turn to this God who loves you and is good. Now, here's why this point is kind of important for us. Because increasingly, we are living in what is referred to as a post-Christian society that does not share the common language and assumptions that people may have shared even just 50 years ago in the 1970s. In fact, Sam Chan, in the book I recommended at the start of our series, How to Talk About Jesus Without Being That Guy, which I think is a cool title, He talks about three phases of sharing the good news over the last 100 years, particularly in the West, because this is not necessarily in other places in the world, but especially in the West. And he says, phase one, we're going to call it the Billy Graham phase, or the Billy Graham era. And this is the mid to late 20th century. And it wasn't just Billy Graham, but we're using him as an example. Billy would give a 20-minute talk. And his talk assumed that everybody actually understood what he was saying. And mostly would agree with the basics of what he was saying. And he could assume that his audience was what might be called Christianized. Even if they didn't follow or even if they didn't believe, they were raised with some of that or they went to Sunday school as kids. And so he could talk about things like guilt and sin and assume that everybody considered those to be bad things. And he could talk about God's grace and forgiveness and assume people felt like they actually needed that. And he could use language like the Bible says as if that was an authoritative statement, and assume that people would go, that's an authority that I should listen to. And he could talk about Jesus and the cross, and he could assume that people actually knew what he meant by all of that. And he could call them at the end of 20 minutes to say yes to that message with little explanation, and they could, and they would. Then there's phase two, which Chan says starts in the early 21st century. I'm calling it the defeater belief era, the era of the new atheists, where many people began to object to some of the big ideas in ways that Billy's audience didn't object. They just didn't push back in that same way. And so to get through to someone or communicate adequately, you might have to overcome some very strong objections or beliefs like, well, what about science? And how does that, match up with what you think you believe? Or what about suffering? And why is there so much pain in the world? Or what about other faiths? And what about them? And how can you really trust the Bible? Why would you consider that authoritative? And even here, though, during this second phase, we could assume people kind of had some of the basic knowledge. In fact, the fact that they had the basic knowledge was the reason why they were objecting and pushing back against some of these ideas and raising questions that needed to be answered and are good to address and think through and answer. Enter phase 3, the post-Christian era. And we're kind of in the combination of those two, but leaning towards the third now, where people, he says, are just in a completely different universe. And this actually might be you, or it might be where you've been. And in fact, people might have a lot more in common with pre-Christian Lystra than Billy Graham's America. And not only do they not believe that basic storyline, they don't even know it. They don't even know it, and they don't know why they should care. In fact, in Chan's words, it's of no relevance to them. And deep down, they actually suspect that the whole story is a tool of oppression to be used by people who used to be in power. And the words and the language that's often used to convey that story don't have any shared meaning with the people who are hearing it. And so Barnabas and Paul, they were adept, and they were in tune enough to recognize these people don't know this story. And telling them this story will not resonate with them, that they needed to talk in language and with a storyline that the people they're talking to could resonate with and would actually consider it to be good news. And so instead, they point to common grace, and they point to the ideas and the longings and the desires and the human experiences that we all have in common. And this is a really big idea, and I think a very important idea for us here in our cultural moment, that the ideas and the longings, the desires, the hopes, the expectations, the human experiences that we have in common often provide a gracious context to share the good news. That if the storyline doesn't necessarily have any shared meaning, and it doesn't necessarily, and the words that are often used to explain that story don't have any shared meaning, then I'm going to begin with things that actually do have shared meaning, and I am going to lean into those to create a gracious context for a conversation. So as we end today, I want to grab just a few ideas from Barnabas and Paul's playbook to help us with this big idea in week 4 of our series. And the first one is this. We've been talking about this throughout the series, but this is what they do. Begin where people are at, not where we want them to be or where you hope they or think they should be. Begin where people are at. Begin where people are at. And this requires us to listen enough and pay close attention enough, and frankly, to care enough to enter into the other person's world with them. Truly, it's an act of self-sacrifice. It's an act of love and generosity, and it is an act of emotional intelligence, because relationally healthy people don't treat other people as projects. And relationally healthy people don't pitch people something against their will. They connect with people. That's what relationally healthy people do. And they connect with them where they're at, and they care about them where they are currently at. And Jesus was exceptional at this, exceptional at entering into another person's story, paying attention, listening, asking good questions, getting way down deep into their story. And then with that, to point their story to God's story in unique and just creative and authentic ways. It's what Philip did last week, and it's what Barnabas and Paul do in this scene. They begin right where the crowd is at. And then, second thing that I think we can learn and need to is to ditch the religious jargon. To ditch the religious jargon, because in a post-Christian world, so many of the words that are often used to tell the story do not have shared meaning anymore. They do not mean the same thing. In fact, often the very ideas don't always translate. Like guilt, like you're guilty and you need forgiveness, like guilt. Why do I need forgiveness? What am I guilty of? I'm just being me. I'm doing what's right for me, and I'm living my best life, and I don't feel guilty about it. well, then I suppose a different message or a different kind of conversation needs to be created, right? And yet many people, and people who call themselves Christians, by the way, I'm not trying to bag on anyone. In fact, it might be many of us here are often very attached to those specific words that I threw up on the screen a little bit earlier that they don't use, as if the words themselves are the truth, as if the words themselves are the point, but they're not. And in fact, in any conversation about anything at all, if the words I'm using don't mean to you what they mean to me, or worse than that, don't mean anything at all to you, then I am not communicating very well. And you know that's true because you've had conversations with medical professionals who did not know how to talk your language, and you're like, you're using words that I don't know, and then you're using some words that I kind of use, but I don't use them that way. Like clearly you're saying something that I don't say. When I say that word, I don't know what you're talking about. That is not very good communication, is it? And so Barnabas and Paul, they ditch all that lingo. They ditch it all, the language that they use with such facility in the synagogue. They ditch it all to talk to people in the language that they will understand. And I want to be able to do that too. I want to be able to do that too, to talk about God and faith and the spiritual journey and things that I know are good, not just for me, but for others too. And I want to be able to talk about those with words, the kind of words that anyone might hear in the office or on the ball field, that same kind of everyday language. And that's what they do. And we need to learn how to do that. Like, how would I say this if I weren't using these words? And then use this non-religious jargon to tell them a better story. And this is exactly what they do. They just tell them a better story. They tap into the things that those people hope for and long for. And we can learn how to just tap into things that people hope for and long for, like love and beauty and community and a shared humanity of meaning and identity and transformation and real growth and health and justice and human dignity and human rights, all of which actually come to us through this story and through no other story at all. And we can talk about how the God that Jesus made known to us is actually the truest and only authentic and surest way to experience all of that and more. And we can learn how to tell a better story. To begin where people are at, to ditch all the religious lingo and tap into a better story. For some of us, this is a big ask. This is a really big step, and we might all agree that it's an essential step, but how can we take it? And so I just want to highly recommend that book that a lot of you have already told me that you're reading, that I recommended earlier, from Sanchan, How to Talk About Jesus Without Being That Guy. I've got a couple other books that I could recommend too, but here's the deal. This is what Barnabas and Paul do. This is what they do. The path that you're on does not get you the things you desire most. It is empty. It is worthless. It is lifeless, but there is a living God. There is a life, and he actually has shown you his goodness. His fundamental posture towards you is kindness, and he's inviting you to turn to him and know him now. And it is good news. It is good news, but Luke has to tell us, and you need to know, that even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. It's like, yeah, we're still doing this thing with a bull. Like, you know that, right? Because just in case you're Zeus and Hermes. And here's why: because these ideals, these fears that we have, that all of us have, the compulsions, the obsessions that we often have, they run deep. They aren't wiped away by a single or even 2 or 3 conversations. And then Luke tells us some of the religious leaders from the last 2 cities they had visited, some of them coming now 100 miles away, come and show up in Lystra, and they stir up the crowds. And this time, after almost stoning him back 20 miles ago and a few days ago, they succeed, and they stone him. And they drag him outside of the city, just as it happened to Stephen, and they leave him there, certain that he is dead. But after the disciples, because that's what the followers of Jesus were called, gathered around him, he got up and he went back into the city, and the next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe, and we will pick up the story right there in Derbe next week with part 5 of our series, Good News is for Sharing. Hey, before you take off, I just want to remind you that part of what we're doing right now as a community is this thing called Operation Christmas Child. We ran through 100 boxes last week, just ran through all the ones we had, and then we bought a bunch of these new, like plastic ones. We got a bunch of them just so that you can grab 1 or 2 or 3 boxes, take them out of here, grab your kids if you got kids, fill them up with good stuff, and bring them back next week. So drop by that table, and then don't forget trunk or treat next weekend. Grab these boo bags are outside on the patio, and you grab the Christmas child things in the lobby, and then head way out and grab 2 or 3. We got 100. They're not all sitting on that table, so don't worry about taking them all. Grab a few of these, drop these off at your neighbors, do something good this week. You'll also see out there's our One Step Gala, which is what we do. Part of this ministry we call One Step. That's for single parent families, and especially single parent families, single moms especially, who are at risk of homelessness. And we do this every year. The cost is a little bit higher, but that's why we do it. And so you can drop by that table as well. In fact, you have a card in your on your seats that I dropped mine. That's right. There it is. You have a card like this on your seat. You scan that QR, and you can do that there. On your way out, don't forget to drop those Connect cards in the offering baskets. And of course, if you're part of the Terra Nova community, you already know that your generosity makes everything that we're talking about possible. And so our guest services will be standing at the doors on the way out. But I want to pray for us. And as you're just kind of thinking through maybe people you know and the world that we live in right now and our cultural moment and what it means to actually represent this good news in an authentic and real way, I want to encourage you to have your own conversation with God as I lead us. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for the good news. I want to thank you that it's been so incredibly good in my life, what you rescued me from, what you brought me out of. Just so incredibly grateful. You truly have shown us kindness, even in the midst of a broken, fallen, pain-filled world. We are thankful. And I pray that you would give us the grace and the wisdom to learn how to talk about you and to talk about what you have done, which is so good and so amazing, in a way that is just resonant with our cultural moment, and that through us, you would draw so many people to know who you are and to follow the living God. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, thank you so much for being here today. Hope you'll join us next week for Trunk or Treat and, of course, part 5 of our series, Good News is for Sharing. We'll pick up right where we left off. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you back next weekend.